Welcome to the Lawyering Peace interview series, where we explore the intricacies of negotiations, conflict mediation, and diplomacy in peace processes. Join us as we dive into the insights of prominent conflict mediation experts to discuss negotiation strategies, the challenges faced in negotiations, strategies for success, and in some instances, what has led to failure. I am your host, Dr. Paul R. Williams, the founder and president of the Public International Law and Policy Group, and the Rebecca Grazier Professor of Law and International Relations at American University. Today, I am very excited to be joined in this interview by Dr. Patrick Maluki, a professor at the University of Nairobi and Kenya's top expert in peace and diplomacy. Dr. Maluki has extensive experience in the peace and conflict mediation arena. He holds his PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies from the Masinde Muliro University of Science and Technology in Kenya, and is an expert trainer and researcher in international negotiation, mediation, human rights, governance, and peace-building issues. Today, we are going to focus on Dr. Maluki's in-depth knowledge of the causes of conflict, conflict prevention, and conflict mitigation. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Maluki. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and kick off with the first question for discussion, and this relates to the causes of conflict. What should mediators know about the root causes of conflicts in the contemporary international landscape, and in particular with the focus on those related to the regional conflicts in which much of your research focuses, such as the Horn of Africa?
Thank you, Professor, for this opportunity. Just as you said, I'm Dr. Patrick Maluki. I teach at the University of Nairobi, specifically the Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies. Yes, my area of research is peace building and post-conflict reconstruction. Thank you for that question, and especially dwelling on the root causes of conflict. Ideally, root cause of conflict are very diverse. We can start from the human aspect of conflict, and I think it's well done, meaning that we could have, from the Obesian point of view, bad people who will actually commit crime, they will hurt other people, and therefore there will be conflict out of the nature of a person. But also the other line of thinking, which is advanced by John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and then John Locke. Lockean thinking is that the environment basically account for the cause of conflict. And I think this is where I want to dwell on mostly, that when an environment is not favorable for human survival, there will always be struggle, there will always be competition. And because human beings have emotions, they may not be able to manage their struggle. Over time, this can spill over and lead to conflict. In the regional context in Africa, we have conflict majorly coming from environmental causes. Environment which may be internally generated through governance struggles and the competition over scarce resources, but also environment that may be caused by external factors and external interventions. Africa has been a corner that has seen competition by great powers. And that competition has led to division in terms of ideological leanings, in terms of language, among other factors that has split the African society into different segments. And whenever we have these borders, linguistic borders, ideological borders, economic borders, all these are caused frictions. And this can be seen in many conflict systems, like the Great Lakes conflict system, where you find DRC Congo, with Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, forming a conflict system that is very closely related. But it can also be seen in the Horn of Africa, which is also another conflict system where you find the Sudan, Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, all the way up to Kenya. So we can have varied causes of conflict that could be internally generated by the competition among African societies of themselves, or even externally, generated because of competing international interests by great powers and other actors. I think basically that competition, the fact that you have incompatible interests is very common among African societies.
Well, Patrick, let me follow up on that given that conflict assessment, that conflict analysis that you have just provided, in the context of conflict negotiation and mediation, how can diplomatic efforts be proactively employed to prevent these types of conflicts from escalating? And what role can regional organizations, if any, play in preventing conflict?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, diplomatic measures can really be effective in preventing conflict because they open avenues of communication. Essentially, the first casualty of conflict is a breakdown in communication. When people get aggrieved and they don't talk, then of course they will be overcome by emotions, they can become violent. And the essence of diplomacy is to do the open channels of communication, all right, where people can voice out their concerns and then provide a forum where the different actors can sit and bring out their concerns for a discussion. And I think when we talk about preventive diplomacy, it's about fact-finding missions. It's about early warning system to detect areas which are like to be conflict hotspots, so that diplomatic communication can be started early enough before the situation gets out of hand. We usually talk about the right moments in relation to conflict management and resolution. And so when we employ diplomacy, then you find that the diplomatic communication can manage these kind of early warnings to bring together the conflicting parties. So diplomacy is very essential, and mediators and negotiators need to have the skills of detecting, analyzing, and responding to conflict appropriately. I think from a conflict management point of view, conflict can be resolved. The weakness or the problem is when you do not have negotiation skills, when we don't have qualified people who can enter in conflict professionally, analyze it, and intervene at the right time and the right procedures.
Well, Patrick, you've emphasized the need for having the expertise to open those channels of communication, to know the right time to engage, to identify the conflicts. Let's now discuss a little bit some of your research, drawing on your expertise with both Rwanda and Burundi. And can you speak to some of the key peace-building strategies that have been applied in those contexts in order to ensure sustainable peace? Are there peace-building strategies that might be particularly valuable in conflicts which involve multiple stakeholders and complex human rights issues? Let's learn from your experience, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Williams. Yes, of course, I did my thesis on peace building in Rwanda and Burundi. And one of the findings that I came up with was the need for collaborative peace building, which is inclusive, which is sustainable. And here, one of the strategies that is important is the recognition and ownership by the different parties that no one is innocent whenever we get into conflict. Parties must accept that all of them have done something wrong to each other, and there is need own up, and that genuineness can create an environment for negotiation. And we have to begin from that realization that you will not get everything that you want, but you'll also not lose everything. So we talk about the right moment of the people, after they have experienced violence over time. There should be interventions from either regional organizations, the United Nations, African Union, to bring the people to the table and allow them to speak out. Then after that, they must agree that they are willing to negotiate, the turning point where you realize that you need to give and take. And what I found in Rwanda was that genuineness of each party accepting some portion of the blame and working towards a national reconciliation. Right? So through mediation, these parties were talked to. It was brought to their understanding that it is in the best interest for the society to move forward. And I think that diplomatic intervention was very useful. Then after that, they were able to come up with different institutions that were needed. For example, they had the Reconciliation Commission. They came up with the local courts for trying offenders, where there was forgiveness, where people owned up. And that actually contributed a lot to the stability of society. In other words, the most successful peace building must be from within the society that has suffered conflict, because that society need to forgive each other, need to accept whatever has happened, and therefore come up with strategies which they feel can help them to heal. So there is no one fit or jacket when it comes to peace. It is very context specific. So what applies to Rwanda may not apply in Somalia. So this will depend on the conflict, because you have to do a conflict analysis to understand the actors, the causes, the context. And therefore, when you intervene, you must intervene in the correct context for that society. When there was conflict in Rwanda, there was conflict in Haiti. But you could not apply same techniques in the two areas because of the differences in actors and the causes. Therefore, what I want to say is that conflict management or resolution is very context specific. What you need to possess is the diplomatic skills of how to approach conflict management, how to really do conflict analysis, and how to bring together the skills of negotiation to bring the parties together and convince them to own up to the peace building process. If that happens, they will generate internal solutions which work better for the societies.
Well, Dr. Patrick, let me pick up on the last comment you had about skills, going from the big picture conflict analysis, strategic approach. Let's move now a little bit into the details. You've done quite a bit of training and acted as a consultant for those involved in negotiating or mediating in Kenya, South Sudan, and Somalia. What are those skills that are invaluable that you wish every mediator and every participant in a peace negotiation really focused on before going into the negotiation?
I think one skill that's very important for a negotiator is to know that he or she does not have authoritative decision-making power for the parties. No, you are a facilitator to homegrown solution to the conflict. And therefore, what you do first is to open channels of communication. You begin from that good office kind of a situation where you break the deadlock between the communities. Now, once you've been able to bring the different teams to the table, then of course, go through the negotiation process in a professional manner, where first you will have big ears to listen emotionally, to listen to the people verbally, but active listening, where you even empathize without apportioning blame, because conflict management is very sensitive. the moment you try to apportion blame on one side, you really can polarize. So as a mediator, you must actually be the scapegoat, the person that each party will look up to justify why they are doing whatever they are doing. And so you must have a very big heart where you absorb weaknesses, for the better way of correcting each party. You absorb their weakness, but then talk to them to tell them where they were without offending them. It's very delicate, all right? And if it's not well handled, in fact, why many conflicts today end up not being properly resolved is because of the weakness of the mediator. When the mediator becomes very obstructive, you become very, we have power mediation. Sometimes it may work, but it may not be long lasting. I've pointed out in most of my lectures that what happened in Burundi during Mandela's time, because Nelson Mandela, being a very charismatic leader, went to Burundi with the skills of power mediation. Of course, the conflict was very intractable, but still it didn't give enough time to all the parties to air out their grievances. He came up with the resolutions and persuaded the teams to abide to that. It didn't work very well. Burundi didn't have actually comprehensive peace for some time. That's because power mediation. So how a mediator approaches the parties and the process, how he or she manages the process of mediation by allowing each party to own the process, to be able to speak out and to be heard, and to show them that each party matters is very important. So sometimes the polarization may bring in different perceptions, and if that happens, because mediation fanning out grievances, institution building, and of course bring to the parties to understand, the best alternative to negotiate solution, all right? Whatever options are available, you must be able to build scenarios of how to reach an agreement. Agreements are not obvious. They need to be cultivated. And as a mediator or a negotiator, you need to understand where you want to take your parties, and therefore come up with the scenarios and propose different options for the parties to accept. Don't force your opinion to the parties. Sometimes we have situations where great powers come, we say, take it or leave it. Yes, that can happen, but what are the consequences? The consequence would be, unsustainable peace agreement, and there are very many of them. Many diplomats have witnessed, peace agreements that have been signed, but they have not been implemented because it reached a point of take it or leave it, or we'll give you a solution. So these are things that we need to avoid. So mediation on a negotiation must be very patient with the parties and ensure that they understand the purpose and the value of peace for their society. It should not be a rushed process. Thank you.
Dr. Patrick, that's very insightful in terms of the role that the mediator should play in letting the parties drive the process and not have power mediation. There are two particular issues that you're an expert in and have done quite a bit of research that are also very complicated in mediation. And I want to get your thoughts and ideas on those. And one is human rights, the human rights dimension of peace agreements, and the other is gender dimension of peace agreements. How have you seen, or how do you recommend that mediators go about addressing these complex issues, and in particular, ensuring inclusivity of both those with gender identity and victims of human rights violations? How does a mediator manage those issues?
Thank you. I think the issue of human rights is really controversial and not very easy to resolve, but very important, because if not resolved, then the process is not yet done. So effective mediators and negotiators must understand human rights discourse very well, as specified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Actually, the International Bill of Rights provides very comprehensive rights that people facing conflict need to get. We have international humanitarian law discourse, which is also very broad and comprehensive with regard to how armed conflict should be dealt with. So aspect of distinction of objects, principles of proportionality, all these are aspects that touch on human rights of the people involved in a conflict. And when they are violated, they need to be addressed. But the most important aspect of human rights is that of inclusivity. And because I think this is where mistakes are usually made. When we are doing conflict analysis, one of the aspects to do is who are the actors? If we do not get the actors well covered comprehensively, then we are likely to leave out a very important component of the peace building process. I want to give an example. In the Kenyan case, Kenya went through post-election violence 2008, and we got very good help through Kofi Annan and panel of the wise, and we went through a mediation process. But one issue actually stood out very, very clearly. It took very long. Even now, it has kind of died out. And that was the IDPs, the issues of internally displaced persons as deserving human rights, as people who needed to be looked into, was actually kind of ignored. The peace building and the mediation process focused on the political aspect of the competing political parties, but it did not give enough emphasis on IDPs. And that problem, even after we had the handshake and we had coalition government, we still remained with the Kenyans who didn't have a place of abode because they had been uprooted from their homes, but the government did not get up, or rather the mediation process did not address that human rights aspect. And I remember a situation when the government used to buy land some places, but those pieces were rejected. Then you take to them place because there was no national approach on how to accept all the Kenyans, irrespective of. So that process, the mediation process in Kenya was weak on that aspect. And so in many different mediation processes, you'll find an aspect of human rights that has been left. The aspect of inclusivity is very important. How comprehensive is the analysis of the actors, of the causes, of the context? We need to understand the whole picture of the conflict in order to have comprehensive entry to it. And therefore, I agree, I am happy you have raised this, but it is one thing that you can only appreciate if you are already converted with regard to the human rights dimensions of peace building. Otherwise, it's very easy to ignore some actors who you think are not very significant, and that then still complicates issues. We had the situation in Sudan when there was a comprehensive peace agreement between the North and the South. But one omission was Darfur was not part of the deal. It didn't last long, and Sudan didn't have peace. So the approach is very important. Give them enough space so that when you have the peace agreement, it caters for each and every.
Dr. Patrick, that's a great example of some of the challenges that face in addressing the human rights issue, as well as women's rights and the gender dimension. Are there other challenges that you advise those that you're working with to be prepared for that are unexpected? They expect that it's going to be complicated. They expect that the other side might be hostile. But what are some of the surprising challenges that you share with mediators and with parties before they go into the room? What should they expect that they're not expecting?
I think from my experience, I think one of the challenges that mediators have to really be ready for is the unexpected happenings, because we are dealing with a political situation, and in politics, the end justifies the means. So you find that in a number of situations, you could be taking a particular focus in mediation, and then the dynamics quickly change because of the external factors. Yeah, or maybe a catastrophe happens. You know, we have what we call complex emergencies. We had a situation in Haiti when there was violence, and all of a sudden an earthquake struck the same country. And so it became really complex. So these are some of the things that probably mediators may need to prepare for, that there is usually the unusual happenings that you didn't expect. And therefore, you need to be able to really refocus yourself and address that without giving up. Otherwise, as you said, there is no script for mediation. No, it is application of tact and intelligence. You will have to raise to the occasion, depending on what is happening. So dynamics in mediation negotiation can change either because of internal factors that could have happened within the society that is going through mediation, or it can happen because of external interference that maybe important, significant actor outside there has already changed his or its position with regard to what is happening, and it takes a very different position that you are not expecting, and starts complicating things, during the mediation process. So that's why you need to have the diplomatic skills of looking at things from a very intelligent and tactical point of view, where you may need to know how to address different challenges as they arise. But it is not done until it is done. Anything can happen midway, but you must stay on the course.
Well, Dr. Patrick, let me ask two final questions, and I'll put them together. The first of which is, are there any instances of surprising successes in peace negotiations? And you participated in them, or you studied them, and you thought, now that was a real surprise. This was a successful negotiation, and it was these two or three things that drove that successful negotiation. And then my last question is, what is the one takeaway that you want our listeners to remember 5, 6, 7 years from now from this podcast? What is the one thing that's most important for building a durable peace? Over to you.
Thank you. The Mozambique negotiation was a success that many people didn't expect to happen. And it was facilitated from a very professional point of view. Anyone can read the Mozambique mediation process and how the last minute saved the collapse of the talk, and the parties were able to agree, and a functional government was established in that country. What I would expect listeners to take 7 years after now, maybe, that conflict is endemic in society. We cannot eliminate conflict. All what we do in the academy and in discourse is to manage conflict. And managing conflict involves the practices of mediation and negotiation. The entire Article 33 of the UN specifies specific methods of dealing with the conflict. All right? And so we need to build capacity for international society to live in harmony, because the human nature, as Thomas Hobbes said, could be bad and at any rate evil. We'll always face bad people, as we have seen throughout history. However, through mediation and negotiation, we can actually remove the different layers, just like an onion. You peel the layers of a society, of a people, and bring them to an understanding. In other words, conflict resolution is possible. There is no conflict that is beyond resolution. We may have intractable conflict, but using the right approaches, using the correct skills, and the strong determination, conflict management is possible, and conflict can be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Patrick, it's been a real pleasure having this conversation with you. In this brief period of time, I've learned so much. I'm sure that our listeners have learned so much as well about strategies, conflict analysis, challenges, successes, and your thoughts on human nature. My earlier degree in life was political theory, Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, Rawls. So I really enjoy the way in which you've woven that into your understanding of peace negotiations. And it's clear why everybody says you're the top expert on negotiations and diplomacy in Kenya, and why you are so sought after for your training, consultation, and engagement. So, Patrick, thank you again from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate your time and energy, and I look forward to our future conversations.
Thank you very much, Williams. It was a pleasure